Frederick Volkov's recovered log, a bathtub filled with viscous oil emitted clicks. Click, click, click. A slow, wet rhythm against the ceramic, like a trapped insect tapping its wings. I traced the log's edge with a gloved finger. The cold steel of the skyscraper's skeletal remains biting through my coat. Outside, the whiteout swallowed the city, reducing everything to a monochrome void where the wind hissed through frozen spines of steel. The air tasted of ozone and static, thick enough to choke on. I followed the sound, this low, resonant hum vibrating up through the soles of my boots, a counterpoint to the oil's clicking. It pulled me deeper into the overgrown botanical garden, where skeletal ferns, encased in ice like shattered glass, pulsed with a faint, sickly green bioluminescence. Each pulse cast long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe on the high-gloss black pavement. The hum deepened, resonating in my molars. Fufrum, thrum, thrum. It came from a patch of frozen earth, where a dead fox lay half-buried in the ice. Its fur was stiff, coated in a fine layer of frost, but the hum emanated from its still form, a subsonic thrum that made the ice beneath my feet tremble. I knelt, the cold seeping through my trousers, my breath pluming in the frigid air. The fox's eyes were open, milky and empty, yet the hum seemed to emanate from them. I reached out, fingers brushing the icy fur, and the hum flared a physical vibration in my chest, making my teeth ache. The sound synced with the oil's clicks in my memory, a terrible duet. Then, I heard it, the faint, brittle finchink of ice giving way under my boot, too late. My ankle twisted. I crashed forward, landing hard on my left elbow. The impact wasn't sharp. It was a wet, crushing crunchy that echoed inside my skull, a sound that felt like my own bones were splitting open. I gasped, the air knocked out of me, the cold shock of the ice burning through my sleeve. I stared at the wound, my elbow bent at an impossible angle, the skin stretched taut over the jagged bone, the ice already darkening with blood. The hum from the fox intensified, vibrating the frozen ground, shaking the very air around me. It vibrated my teeth, my ribs, my skull. Thrum, thrum, thrum. It wasn't just the fox, it was the building, the ice. Huh, huh. I looked up, expecting the cat. Echo always found me in the dark. But the garden was empty. Then, movement, a flicker of gray against the white. Echo materialized from the swirling snow, its emaciated frame stark against the ice, every bone protruding like carved ivory. Its eyes, yellow, unnervingly fixed, were fixed on me. On my fractured elbow, the reflection in Echo's pupils wasn't distorted. It was swidrung, the bone's jagged edge, the blood, the ice, all mirrored perfectly but warped, stretched like a funhouse mirror. Then, as the hum pulsed through my teeth, Echo's eyes shifted. The yellow deepened, glowing faintly, a sickly amber light emanating from within. And beneath the hum, beneath the vibration of the fox, beneath the sound of my own ragged breath, I heard it, a deep, grinding free-creak from my own body, a sound like tectonic plates shifting, the groan of my bones settling into the fracture, groaning in perfect, terrible sympathy. The glow in Echo's eyes flared, just for an instant, as the hum swallowed the sound of my own breaking. The lobby was a mausoleum of polished steel and high-gloss black. The whiteout had retreated somewhat, leaving a diffused gray light that seemed to leach the color from everything. It amplified the unnatural sheen, the oppressive perfection of the space. The hum saw that subsonic tremor suit had followed me, a constant pressure against my skull. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a feeling, a vibration that resonated in the marrow of my bones. I moved stiffly, the fractured bone in my elbow a searing reminder of the ice-covered garden. Each step sent a jolt of pain radiating up my arm. The air tasted metallic, like old blood and ozone. I focused on my breathing, a shallow, measured rhythm against the throbbing in my head. The porcelain doll lay discarded near a shattered terracotta pot, shards of clay scattered across the black pavement like fallen teeth. It was unsettlingly intact, its painted smile fixed in a grotesque parody of cheerfulness. I avoided looking at it directly. The memories of Volkov's log swam at the edge of my awareness. The oil, the clicks, the unsettling calm in his final entry. My reflection stared back from the polished steel wall. It was off. I'd seen warped reflections before. A trick of the light, a product of fatigue. But this was different. This wasn't a distortion. It was a fish-shift T. A subtle bowing in my spine, visible as a ridge beneath the fabric of my suit. A barely perceptible elongation of my limbs. I blinked, thinking it was a phantom, a trick of the failing simulation, but it remained. The reflection's eyes mirrored my own, but they held a vacant quality, a detached observation that felt profoundly wrong. The hum pulsed, a slow, deliberate beat. Thrum, thrum. It seemed to emanate from the wall itself, vibrating through the steel into my skin. I reached out, my gloved hand extending towards the mirrored surface. The cold of the steel was immediate, a shock against my skin. As my fingertips made contact, a hairline fracture spiderwebbed across the reflection's hand. The sound was brittle like ice shattering, a sharp fuddy that echoed unnaturally in the vast lobby. And then I saw it. Protruding from the fractured surface of the reflection's hand, a bone. Pale, elongated, clearly not part of the human anatomy. It was a grotesque parody of a hand, a fractured mockery of my own. My stomach lurched, a wave of nausea washing over me. The resonance deepened, the fibrum becoming a palpable pressure against my chest, a frantic heartbeat mirroring my own rising panic. I recoiled, stumbling backward, my breath catching in my throat. The distorted reflection mirrored my movement, its face a mask of unsettling calm. It felt like I was looking at a stranger, a twisted version of myself trapped behind a pane of glass. The polished steel seemed to ripple, the reflection momentarily dissolving into a swirling vortex of distorted shapes. The air grew thick, heavy with the smell of ozone and something else. Something acrid, like decaying metal. The distant resonance intensified, throbbing like a physical force, a monstrous heartbeat that threatened to overwhelm my senses. I pressed my hands against my ears, trying to block out the sound, but it was inside me now, a vibration that resonated in my skull. Thrum, thrum. It felt like the building itself was groaning, settling around me, crushing me. Then, the doll's head tilted, a slow, deliberate movement, as if guided by an unseen hand. Its painted lips parted and a voice, thin and brittle as spun glass, whispered, "Your potential is frozen, Frederick." The sound was close, intimate, as if the doll were speaking directly into my ear. The whisper ended abruptly, and the doll's mouth snapped shut, its painted smile returning to its frozen, unsettling expression. The doll's whisper coiled through the air, a serpent of spun glass unspooling from its cracked lips. The words slithered into my ear, not as sound but as pressure. "When you mimicked grief, now you are it." The resonance pulsed in sync, a slow, deliberate throb that vibrated in my teeth. My breath hitched, shallow and ragged, the scent of ozone thick enough to taste. The steel floor beneath me seemed to exhale, a low, metallic groan, like a dying machine settling into silence. I turned. Echo crouched in the doorway, its emaciated frame a skeleton draped in fur. Ribs pressed against its belly like the bars of a cage, each one a sharp ridge beneath the translucent skin. Its golden eyes too wide, too knowing, locked onto mine. The air between us shimmered, warping at the edges like heat rising from pavement. The doll's voice slithered again, layered now with a wet, clicking sound, like ice fracturing beneath boots. "You were never Frederick. You were only the echoes of others." My fingers twitched. The gloves felt too tight, the fabric straining against something beneath. I flexed them, and the joints cracked, not the usual pop of knuckles, but a brittle, snapping splinter like dry kindling. The sound echoed through the lobby, bouncing off the steel walls in a distorted staccato. My stomach lurched, the resonance deepened, a slow, rhythmic pulse that matched the beat of my own heart, only wrong off kilter. I stumbled back, my heel striking the floor with a dull foe. The impact sent a shockwave up my leg, and my middle finger, just my middle finger, cracked. Not a bend, not a strain, but a clean, audacious snap, as if the bone had been hollowed out from the inside. Pain flared, white-hot and electric, but beneath it was something else, the sickening fungi of something breaking, the way a twig snaps underfoot. I stared at my hand. The finger hung at an unnatural angle, the tip already darkening, the nail splitting like a cracked eggshell. The doll's laughter was a series of sharp, metallic scintings, like wind chimes in a gale. It tilted its head, the painted smile stretching into something obscene. "More fractures will mend the pattern." Echo didn't move. It watched its tail twitched once, slow and deliberate, the only sound in the suffocating silence. The shattered fragment of my finger lay on the floor, glistening wet. I didn't remember losing it, didn't remember the sick snap. Only the resonance remained, throbbing in my skull, in my bones, a slow, relentless heartbeat that wasn't mine. The doll's voice was a whisper now, barely audible, but it slithered into my thoughts anyway. "You were never the actor, you were only the stage." My breath came in short, sharp gasps. The air tasted like copper. The reflection in the steel wall, what was left of it, pulled, warped, my limbs elongating, my spine bowing into something unnatural. The hum grew louder, a living thing inside me pressing against my ribs, my skull. I didn't run, not yet, but the doll's whisper curled around me like smoke, and I knew I would. The distant clang of celebratory bells, tinny and fractured, drifted through the whiteout. They were a mockery, a desperate, fragile cheer against the oppressive silence of the lobby. New Year, Eve, 1999. The year the world was supposed to end, or at least hiccup violently. It hadn't, of course, nothing ever did. Just this. My fingers traced the cold, slick surface of the black marble desk. The air tasted of static, of something about to break. I hadn't been looking for a book. I hadn't been looking for anything at all. Really just existing. Existing within the geometry of this place. The lobby, the corridors, the endless steel and glass, all humming with that low, insidious resonance. The book was bound in thick, dark leather, the texture like dried riverbed clay. I picked it up. It was surprisingly heavy. The script on the first page shimmered, an unsettling dance of ink and shadow. Asterisk, the cryogenic test failed at 23:59. Asterisk, I blinked. The letters rearranged themselves, sliding into a new configuration. Asterisk, your bones are the test. Asterisk, a coldness, deeper than the ambient chill of the lobby, settled in my gut. The resonance pulsed, a slow, deliberate beat that seemed to emanate from the book itself. My breath hitched. I wanted to drop the book, to fling it across the room, but my fingers were frozen, locked onto the leather. The letters writhed again, a frantic scramble of meaning. I felt a pressure building in my spine, a tightening, of furry wrongness. The high gloss black of my suit strained against the fabric, the seams pulling taut, a sharp, grinding sensation like tectonic plates shifting beneath my skin. I tried to straighten, to ease the pressure, but my movements were jerky, uncoordinated. The bells outside grew louder, distorted, their joyous peal twisting into something mocking. The resonance amplified, a physical force pushing against my eardrums. I could feel it vibrating in my teeth, in the marrow of my bones. The warped reflection in the steel wall showed a grotesque caricature of myself. My posture contorted, my shoulders hunched. The pain was subtle at first, a dull ache radiating from my lower back. Then it sharpened, a searing, localized agony. I looked down. The suit, impeccably tailored just hours ago, was splitting. A jagged tear appeared along my spine, revealing a glimpse of something beneath, something that wasn't human. My vertebrae, visibly distorted, pressed against the fabric, forcing it to buckle and tear. The scent of ozone, sharp and metallic, filled the air. My legs trembled. I braced myself against the desk, the cold marble a small comfort against the escalating chaos within. The book's script blurred, dissolving into a meaningless jumble of symbols. I closed my eyes, willing the pain to subside, willing the resonance to cease. It didn't. It intensified. A memory, not mine, flickered at the edge of my awareness, a sterile white room, a gurney, the hum of machinery. A voice, cold and clinical, reciting protocols, asterisk subject exhibiting signs of adaptation. Asterisk adaptation to what? To this. The bells reached a fever pitch, a cacophony of sound that threatened to shatter my skull. The resonance drowned them out, swallowing the celebration, the world, leaving only the throbbing, relentless pulse. I opened my eyes. The reflection in the steel wall was almost unrecognizable. My spine had curved dramatically, forming a grotesque arc that pressed against the back of my head. The suit was shredded, revealing a lattice of bone and something else, something that wasn't T-bone. The book's final page flickered, the script resolving into a single, stark sentence. Asterisk system reset imminent. Asterisk echo. Tail flicked toward the door. The polished steel pressed against my cheek, cold and unforgiving. A low thrum resonated through the room, a vibration I felt more than heard. It wasn't external. It was subini, a constant, sickening pulse. I tried to sit up, a futile gesture that sent a jolt of pain radiating from my spine. My left leg buckled beneath me, a sickening snap echoing in the confined space. I looked down. The trousers, once crisp and tailored, were shredded along the thigh, revealing a jagged, exposed femur. It gleamed, sickly white under the harsh, sterile light. The scent of ozone clung to the air, a metallic tang that burned the back of my throat. It mingled with the faint, cloying sweetness of something organic, something decaying. I swallowed, the movement a painful grinding in my throat. My shoulder blades jutted at unnatural angles, straining against the remnants of my suit. The fabric, once a symbol of professional composure, now clung to me like a shroud, a mocking testament to my disintegration. Echo sat by the door, a skeletal silhouette against the shimmering wall. Its ribs were starkly visible beneath its thin fur, the bones sharp and prominent. Its eyes, twin pools of unsettling amber, reflected the warped room, distorted and fractured like a funhouse mirror. It didn't blink, didn't flinch. Just watched, judged. I attempted to stand, bracing myself against the steel wall. The effort sent another wave of pain through my spine, a searing agony that stole my breath. Each movement triggered a subtle shift beneath my feet. Fight. A low groan of tectonic plates adjusting, settling fug-a-thump, grug-a-thump. It was a sound I'd begun to associate with my own body, a horrifying accompaniment to my unraveling. This wasn't a room. It was a containment cell, a laboratory. The memory of the book, the shifting script, the agonizing pressure flooded back. The cryogenic test. Funmi bones are the test. The clinical voice echoed in my mind, cold and detached. Adaptation. What was I adapting to? To this transformation, I reached for the door, a desperate, instinctive gesture, but it wasn't a door, not in the conventional sense. It was a shimmering barrier of fractured light, a distortion in the air that rippled with an unsettling energy. My hand passed through it, met only with a cold, tingling resistance. The tectonic groans intensified, a chorus of geological unrest. Tiver thump. Gutta thump. Gutta thump. Panic tightened its grip. I tried to remember who I was, what I was supposed to be. Frederick Volkov, grief actor, professional mourner, a craftsman of sorrow. But the memories felt distant, blurred, like images viewed through a distorted lens. Were they even twemin, thirdifen twenteen? The clinical voice returned, sharper this time. Subject exhibiting signs of cognitive dissonance. My vision swam. The reflections in the steel walls were no longer just warped. They were fragmented, multiplied, a kaleidoscope of grotesque distortions. I saw myself, or rather multiple versions of myself, each more twisted and monstrous than the last. Each a stage in this evolution. Echo shifted, a subtle movement that sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. Its tail flicked toward the fractured light, a deliberate gesture, a signal, a failsafe. The realization struck me with the force of a physical blow. The cat. It wasn't a companion. It was a trigger. My breath hitched. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to shatter this sterile prison, but my body wouldn't obey. It was a puppet, manipulated by forces beyond my comprehension. The tectonic groans reached a crescendo, a deafening rumble that threatened to collapse the room around me. Fugra-thump, gura-thump. Fug. Fuka. Fudiko opened its mouth. The sound that emerged wasn't a meow, it was a crack, a sharp, brittle fracture, like ice splintering under immense pressure. The reflection of the door shattered, a million shards of light exploding outward. The steel beneath my palms was slick with a sheen of condensation, the cold seeping through the torn fabric of my sleeves. My breath fogged the surface, a fleeting distortion that dissolved like smoke. I should have known better than to trust the mirrors here, should have known they'd lie, but I pressed my face closer anyway, the weight of my skull pulling at my neck, a dull ache radiating from the fracture in my spine. The reflection wasn't me. It was a thing hunched against the polished backdrop, its ribs a jagged lattice beneath papery skin, the flesh stretched thin over the hump of its spine. My jawline wasn't mine either, too wide, too sharp. The skin pulled taut like wax over a blade. The eyes in the reflection were hollow, black pits rimmed with yellow, the irises bleeding into the sockets. Unfulfilled fuddy, the doll whispered from the glass, its voice a wet rasp like fingers dragging across a chalkboard. The words slithered into my skull, coiling around the memory of my own name. Frederick Volkov, grief actor, liar. I slammed my fist into the panel. The impact sent a shockwave through my arm, bones splintering like dry kindling. The glass didn't shatter. It yielded, a slow, viscous give as if the surface itself were alive. My knuckles punched through, the resistance of the material clinging to my skin like syrup. The resonance in the room surged, a deep, oscillating hum that vibrated through my teeth, my fillings rattling loose. The air thickened, pressing against my chest, forcing my head back until my vertebrae groaned in protest. The doll's reflection smiled. Too many teeth, too wide. The porcelain cracked at the corners like old ice. Its fingers' long skeletal tapped against the glass, the sound a series of sharp, brittle suckas. The resonance became a physical force, shoving my shoulders back until my spine screamed. I couldn't breathe. The pressure mounted, a crushing weight, and I felt my ribs creak, the cartilage giving way under the strain. Shown body is the final exhibit. Fush. The words echoed in the hollows of my skull, a chorus of voices. The reflection in the glass twitched, its limbs elongating, the joints bending at impossible angles. The doll's mouth stretched wider, the seams of its porcelain face splitting like dry earth. The resonance peaked, a deafening frynthrum, and the world tilted. My vision swam. The fractured reflections multiplied, a dozen versions of myself contorted in the warped glass, each one more broken, more wrong. The doll's voice slithered through the cacophony, a whisper that wasn't meant for ears. Unfulfilled. Unfulfilled. Unfulfilled a single. The pressure released. I gasped, my lungs burning, the taste of copper flooding my mouth. The glass, now a web of cracks, held a single unbroken reflection. The doll's smile remained, its teeth glinting in the sterile light. Your body is the final exhibit. The fractured reflection pulsed, the doll's smile a mocking echo in the web of cracks. Your body is the final exhibit. Asterisk, the words tasted like ash, clinging to the back of my throat. My limbs felt heavy, leaden, as if the gravity itself had shifted. I forced myself to breathe, each inhale a rasping protest against the pressure that still lingered, a phantom weight pressing against my ribs. The metallic tang of blood was familiar now, a constant companion, a tremor, not seismic, not precisely, but a vibration that resonated within my bones, a low hum that seemed to emanate from the very structure of the building. It wasn't painful, not yet, but unsettling, a prelude to something. Else, then, a shift in the periphery, a movement. Echo. The cat emerged from the shadows, its form skeletal and elongated, barely discernible against the high, gloss black of the surrounding panels. It moved with a disconcerting stillness, a deliberate grace that bordered on the uncanny. Its fur, what remained of it, was the color of dust and ash, clinging to its ribs like a shroud. The low resonance deepened, a counterpoint to the frantic hammering of my heart. Thrum. 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 Asterisk, I tried to move, to retreat, but my legs felt rooted to the floor. A paralysis, subtle but undeniable, tightened its grip. My gaze locked onto the cat's eyes. They weren't the eyes of an animal. They were screens, flickering with fragmented data, images too fast to process, a chaotic jumble of information. A flash of silver, the glint of ice. A timestamp, the 3rd of December 1999, 1.2358. A cryogenic chamber, its interior bathed in a sickly blue light. The images dissolved, replaced by a swirling vortex of static. The cat padded closer, its gait deliberate, each step accompanied by a faint foot-click chord against the polished steel. The resonance intensified, a palpable pressure against my temples. I could feel the fracture in my spine protesting, a sharp, insistent ache. I wanted to scream, but my throat constricted, the muscles refusing to obey. The air grew colder, a glacial draft that seeped into my marrow. It stopped directly in front of me, its skeletal frame casting a long, distorted shadow across the floor. The cat raised a paw, a delicate, almost fragile limb, and placed it on my chest. The pressure was minimal, yet it felt invasive. A sickening forecrack echoed in the room, a wet, splintering sound that resonated deep within my sternum. My breath hitched, a strangled gasp. The pain was fleeting, but the realization of what had happened lingered, a cold dread settling in my gut. I tried to raise my arm, to push the cat away, but it wouldn't move. The shoulder joint ground against itself, a grating metallic rasp. It felt disconnected, foreign. My fingers twitched, useless, unresponsive. The fractured reflections in the glass seemed to mock me. A chorus of distorted faces contorted in silent laughter. The dull smile widened, the porcelain seam splitting further. Unfulfilled. Asterisk, the whisper slithered into my mind, a parasitic thought. Echo. Gaze shifted. It was no longer a warning, no longer a plea. It was clinical, assessing. It was the gaze of a scientist observing a failed experiment. A wave of despair washed over me, a crushing weight that threatened to suffocate me. I was a specimen, an anomaly, a broken machine. I attempted to reach out, to touch the cat, to somehow bridge the gulf that separated us. But my arm remained stubbornly fixed, a useless appendage. The resonance swelled, a deafening thrumming through my teeth. The world tilted, the high gloss black walls blurring into a swirling vortex of darkness. Then the cat's paw lifted, and in its claw, nestled amongst the skeletal fingers, was something small, something perfect. A tiny, flawless porcelain doll. The steel wall loomed before me, its surface a flawless void that drank in the dim light like a black hole. My breath fogged the glass, not with condensation, but with the faintest residue of my own unraveling. I pressed my palm against it, the cold seeping through my skin, and the reflection stared back, a grotesque parody of a man. My spine was no longer a spine but a question mark, a jagged arc of bone pressing through my flesh, the vertebrae grinding against each other with every shallow breath. My limbs bent at angles that defied anatomy, the joints swollen and exposed, the skin stretched thin over the raw, pulsating mess beneath. The reflection blinked, if it could, and the distortion rippled, the polished surface fracturing like ice on a frozen lake. A crack spider-webbed across the glass, spreading inward from the edges of my mirrored form. The sound was a low, mournful crackle, the resonance from earlier swelling into a dissonant chord vibrating through my teeth. I jerked my hand back, but the fracture was already too deep. A shard detached itself, a thin needle-like fragment that hovered in the air for the briefest second, before arcing toward me. The world slowed time a viscous syrup, allowing me to track its descent, the way it caught the dim light, the way it glittered, like a sliver of frozen blood. It struck my cheek with a wet thud, embedding itself just below the bone, the cold biting into my skin like a needle dipped in liquid nitrogen. I gasped, but no sound came out. Only the resonance, now a deafening fuffus, a physical force pressing against my eardrums. The reflection shattered completely, the glass dissolving into 1,000 jagged pieces, each one a miniature mirror of my own disfigured form. The fragments rained down like shrapnel, the sharp edges catching the light and scattering it into a storm of fractured reflections. You were never meant to feel. The doll's voice slithered into my mind, a parasitic whisper that coiled around my thoughts. It wasn't coming from the doll itself. I hadn't seen it in hours, but from the air, from the resonance, from the very fabric of this godforsaken simulation. The words settled into my bones, a weight I could taste, metallic and sour. My fingers flew to my cheek, but the shard was already buried too deep. The cold radiated outward, numbing the flesh, and I could feel the edges of the fracture in my spine shift, the vertebrae groaning as they realigned themselves into something worse. A scream tore through me. Not a sound, but a vibration, a physical force that shook my ribs. The reflection's final fragment showed me already frozen in the garden, my body encased in a lattice of black ice, my limbs bent at those impossible angles, my face a mask of silent agony. The resonance peaked, a crescendo of sound and pain, and the world tilted. The garden outside the glass was no longer a garden at all, but a wasteland of twisted metal and dead flora, the sky a swirling vortex of static. The shard in my cheek pulsed in sync with the doll's whisper, the cold seeping deeper, numbing the scream before it could escape. We're setting. The word echoed in my skull, a command buried in the code of this nightmare. The resonance faded into silence, and the last thing I felt was the shard's pulsance, twice, before the world went white. The leather-bound book lay open in my lap, its pages no longer script but a writhing mass of shifting symbols, ink that pulsed like veins beneath translucent skin. My fingers trembled as I traced the edges, the parchment cold against my palm, the scent of ozone and something older, something preserved, rising from its depths. The resonance had become a living thing now, a heartbeat throbbing in my ribs, sinking with the dull thud. Thud of my own pulse, the sound vibrating through the steel walls, through the glass, through the ice outside. The garden was a graveyard of blackened metal and skeletal trees, their branches clawing at the sky like fingers, begging for mercy. And yet, there, in the center of it all, was me frozen in a lattice of jagged ice, my limbs bent at those impossible angles. Echo the cat perched on my chest, her emaciated body trembling, her golden eyes fixed on nothing, her breath a ghostly mist in the frigid air. The doll was behind me. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. I could feel her, the cold brush of porcelain against the back of my neck, the whisper of her seams splitting, the slow, deliberate creak of her joints as she leaned in. The resonance surged, a wave of pressure that pressed against my eardrums, and the book script shifted, the symbols rearranging themselves into words, into sentences, into the truth. You were never supposed to wake up. You were a test subject, a simulation of unfulfilled potential. Your grief was the variable. Your mutations, the system's feedback loop. The words burned. Not in my mind. No, the fire was physical, a searing heat spreading from my chest, from my spine, from the shards still buried in my cheek. My breath came in ragged gasps, fogging the glass as I pressed my forehead against it, staring at the frozen version of myself. The ice glinted under the dim light, catching the resonance like 1,000 shattered mirrors. Echo's tail twitched, her claws digging into the fabric of my coat, her body vibrating in time with the twoo, the thud, the dud. The thud, her eyes reflecting the fractured light, her pupils dilating, contracting, as if she were seeing something I couldn't. The doll's breath was a wet thiffusi against my ear, her voice a needle dragging across my skull. They told you it was a garden, but gardens don't freeze. The ice around my frozen body cracked him, not from the cold. No, this was something else. A slow, deliberate fracture, the sound like 1,000 needles dragging across steel, the resonance swelling into a crescendo, syncing with my pulse, with the doll's words, with the cat's trembling. The shard in my cheek pulsed dead, the cold seeping deeper, numbing the scream before it could form. The ice shattered, not into pieces but into 1,000 thin, jagged filaments, each one a mirror of my own disfigured form, each one catching the light, scattering it into a storm of fractured reflections. You were never meant to feel. The world went white, and then black. The white dissolved into the black, but the black wasn't empty. It was thick, viscous, like cold oil pressing against my eyes. My frozen body, encased in that jagged lattice of ice, felt less like a prison and more like a failing circuit. The thud-thud-thud-thud of my pulse had become a frantic hammering against the steel walls of my own skull. I traced the cold, fractured edges of the ice clinging to my wrist with a finger that felt unnaturally stiff, the motion sending a fresh wave of bone-deep cold through my marrow. The resonance from the book was gone, replaced by a hollow metallic piping that echoed inside my teeth. System degradation, feedback loop. The words from the book burned into my mind weren't just truth anymore. They were the system's dying diagnostics. Echo was still on my chest, but her form was fraying. The emaciated bones beneath her fur were becoming translucent, the golden eyes flickering like a dying bulb. Her breath, that ghostly mist, wasn't fogging the glass anymore. It was dissolving into the black void. I felt the cat's final tremor, a vibration that wasn't in the air but flew through the ice, through the shard buried in my cheek. Then her form began to pixelate, not into static, but into a slow, silent unraveling, like a thread pulled from a worn tapestry. Her last sound wasn't a meow, but a soft, high frequency shh that resonated with the hollow thinking inside my head. The porcelain doll's whisper cut off with the finality of a snapped wire. The silence that followed was worse. It wasn't silence, it was the absence of the distant, oscillating resonance, the low hum of the dead animal I'd found, the fushush of the book's shifting script, the fute crack of ice, the hussy of the doll's breath, the futhi-do of my own failing heart. All those sounds were gone, but their echoes were now sidded, layered, dissonant. I heard the bathtub clicks, sharp, precise, click, click, click. But layered beneath them were the fuddy shush of the book, the puddy crack of the ice, the hissu of the doll, the fuddied of my pulse, all merging into a single, agonizing chord that vibrated my teeth. It was the sound of the system failing, the sound of my own unraveling. The clicks intensified, the dissonant chord rising to a pitch that felt like needles in my eardrums. My frozen limbs, the ones bent at impossible angles, began to ache with a new, deeper pain, not cold, but the grinding of bone against bone as the simulation tried to force a reset. The ice around me wasn't just cracking, it was sous vide reconfiguring, the jagged filaments dissolving into the black void, each fragment reflecting a warped, distorted piece of me, a skeletal hand, a fractured face, the cat's dissolving eyes. The high-gloss black of the void reflected everything, but everything was subtly wrong, stretched thin. Then the bathtub clicks stopped, not faded. Stopped the dissonant chord vanished. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was a physical pressure, a vacuum sucking the sound from my own breath. It was absolute. For one impossible second, there was only the pressure and the cold of the void pressing against my frozen skin. Then, a single, deafening clicky. Not from the bathtub. From Forninsidai, the void. A sound that wasn't sound at all, but the final, sharp release of a mechanism. Silence. In that absolute suffocating silence, a whisper formed, not in my ears but in the space between the silence. It wasn't the doll's voice or the book's words. It was cold, clinical, and final, echoing with the weight of every unfulfilled promise, every potential erased, potential unfulfilled. The words weren't spoken. They were the sound of the system's last, clean shutdown. The black void dissolved into a single point of light, then nothing. The cold, the ache, the whisper, all gone. Only the silence remained.